we would be a top 10 defense. If, we had Darrelle Revis in his prime or Chris Jr. from Denver, we would have one of the best secondaries with, Kenny Vaccaro and Delvin Breaux. Sure, all those statements might be factual, but have almost no chance of actually happening.
Not at
and
all.
I think as fans, and this is honestly something I have had to adjust to myself only over the few years because I've been exposed to more of these players, gotten to talk to them, studied film on more than a fan level, and you just start to learn to see, it's nothing wrong with a fan being a fan, but because of that, I don't expect them to see and understand things in a non-biased light. And that's why a lot of fans get mad at people like, say, Larry Holder, which I don't agree with a lot of what Larry Holder says, but Larry Holder's not a Saints fan. At least you can't tell he is by his writings. And sometimes he just comes through brutally honest, and he's right. He needs to sometimes because Saints fans will get these lenses on, and they'll watch training camp, whether it's in Metairie or it's in West Virginia, and just be like, man, this team's amazing. Reggie Bush has got the best training camp of any player ever. And then we're in full Super Bowl mode. And I hope that they can work on that. Now, regardless, I want New Orleans to stay party city for game day and just this is our team no matter what. I'm still going to games this year even though I've lowered my win total expectations from about 7 to about 5. I don't care if we lose. It's still my team. I'm going to enjoy them. But I think we have to start – it's week 3. We're 0-3, and we've lost to arguably – I know you're different on the Raiders, but I still say we've lost to 2 playoff teams. And to me, if you can't beat playoff teams in the season, you ain't got a chance to beat them in the playoffs. It's just how it is. So at 0-3, I think we need to start being realistic of what the future holds.
No, I couldn't agree more with you when you say that. And I think for this team, I'm to the point now when I said it last night, you and I were trying not to speak the evil, which was the Atlanta Falcons had a chance to come out and actually beat the Saints. But after last night's loss, it wasn't the fact that the Saints lost to that team. It was the idea that there are certain aspects of the Saints that make me just want to pull my hair out because it's not like Atlanta lined up and knew they were the better team. Atlanta had their doubts as well. It was a must-win game for them, make no mistake about it, because if you lose to the Saints and you play Carolina next week and you also have a chance to lose to them, well, now you're at the bottom of the barrel, you're looking up and there's no hope for you. But in the case of the Saints, first week of the season, it's a special teams play that beats you on 2 ways, if you will. You miss 2 kicks yourself, and then you lose on a 2-point conversion, which to me, that's a special teams play.
Yeah. So
you lose on special teams. The following week versus the New York Giants, you get a block kick. So the only touchdown by the New York Giants that was scored was that block kick. So therefore, you put yourself in a position to once again lose because of special teams. Oh, by the way, the Giants won by a field goal. So, again, special teams is beating you right now. And then you play the Atlanta Falcons. And what happens yet again? Special teams with the muff punt. At this point, it's frustrating because I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. This is not even the sign of a young team. This is the sign of a stupid team. And forgive me for saying stupid because I'm not trying to just insult the guy's overall intelligence, but the football IQ, extremely low right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that I have to put on coaching. For example, when the news came out that Delvin Breaux injured himself on a special teams play, my thoughts go to, why is your star cornerback on special teams?
I had the same thought.
I understand the ideology of we want the best players on the field at any given time, but, Drew Brees is pretty athletic. He's not like some immobile quarterbacks. Now, he's not, Alex Smith or Teddy Bridgewater or Michael Vick in his prime of all people, but he's decent. He can get around. We're not putting him, linebacker on punt teams or the safety or the gunner on the kicking team, and we're not doing it to Mark Ingram, your starting running back. We're not doing it to Brandon Cooks, who could make a real nice safety gunner, on the kicking team because he's just so fast. And that just kind of blew my mind. And then you have players who, And here's where it really gets confusing for the team, because you'll have these people do that, and then when they get injured, you're forced to put in people who don't have near as many reps. And I don't have a specific stat on this. I'm sure somebody listening is going to correct me, and if I'm wrong, that's fine. But as speculation, let's take the running into each other punt from last night that really was the momentum swinger. After that point, the game changed. It was in New Orleans' favor until that, and after that, they never had momentum, ever. As soon as they got close, they lost it to that interception return. But Harris runs into his own player. We know what happened. But how many reps did Harris get in special teams, not just throughout the season, but in preseason and in training camp and in OTAs and mini camps? How much work did he do with special teams? How much work did any of them do with special teams? Is there an actual dedicated special teams unit, or are we just throwing in players there who we think need to have some snaps to get some NFL time? I'm beginning to wonder that, because I feel like I've seen that trend happening for several years now, where I'll notice more, instead of some teams will have dedicated special teams players, we'll just have reserve linebackers and reserve corners playing special teams. And I know most people are going to go on paper and say every team does that. I'm not going to say that's not true, but I am going to say there are teams that specifically take certain players that only play special teams, and I'm not just talking about long snappers and the Devin Hester once in a generation. There are dedicated special teams players in this league. And I think the Saints have an issue where they're not building a special teams unit. They're building a unit of players from offense and defense to play special teams. Because, as you're saying, when you're talking about football IQ, that's not something you see from an elite special teams unit who plays special teams. I mean, am I wrong in thinking this? Am I just way off base here?
Not at all. As a man who has been to several of the Saints practices, you're not wrong at all. Yeah, of course, they practice special teams, but there's not an emphasis on special teams. To me, I understand that a lot of fans feel the same way. I do believe it's a matter of coaching, because here's what I've never seen at a Saints practice. I've never seen them do a drill such as, and maybe it's an overestimation or overconfidence that guys should know what to do when the ball does X, Y, and Z. But I've never seen the Saints work on it. I've never seen them do drills as far as, okay, the ball hits at a funny spot, it's bouncing around, what should we do? I've never seen them work on it, because I think if you practice those scenarios, when it happens, your players are shell-shocked. In case in point with this situation, if Harris doesn't try to jump on the ball and run with it, instead he maybe slaps it out of bounds, maybe he just takes a dive and tries to, actually corral the ball instead of trying to run with it. Maybe then the Saints are able to keep that punt, under control. Bad enough you've already run into your own guy, which should be practiced in and of itself. That there has to be a safe word. Most guys use poison or something like that, to where they know when they hear that word, everybody clears out. You get away from the ball if you can. But I've never, and again, I've been to many of the Saints practices. I've never seen them practice a drill like that.
Yeah, same. I haven't got to, just because I'm not down the 504 as often as I like to be. I don't get to see too much, but I do try to get down there and see what I can. But we're getting pretty deep into some of the problems. Let's go ahead and just do a stat overview of the game. We got to pull out the positives, man, because we're going to have every listener just down on their dumps for another 13 weeks. Some positives from the game. Drew Brees, his normal self once again. Now, I will say this, to hop back on the pessimism train for just a second. This stat validates what Brian here has been talking about for the past week. Over 50 attempts by Drew Brees. We, of course, ended up losing this game. But he went 36 of 54 for 376 yards. That's a 7 average, which is, for him, pretty low for a team that usually stretches the field. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. That could have been 2 had it not been for the ball barely scraping the turf on a second interception. And he got sacked twice. Mark Ingram was really hot last night. I wish he would, but he finished with 15 carries, 77 yards on a 5.1 average, as well as reeling in 4 passes for 30 more yards. And how about Kobe Fleener showing up? He had 11 targets, 7 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. He tripled his yardage total, tripled his receiving total and catches from last night's game. I mean, finally showing up. This was the game he had to do it, and he did. I can't knock him. He did have a couple of iffy plays, had some drops by my eyes, but still. And then Brandon Coleman. Where was this guy the past couple years? 8 targets, 7 receptions, 78 yards, and reliable. Catching balls over the field, catching some one acrobatic catch that I can remember, and then Michael Thomas, to me, the future at split end, that Marcus Colson position, 7 receptions on 11 targets. And defensively, Nick Fairley, Cam Jordan, and Craig Robertson, those 3 are probably my only ones that I can say had stellar games. I'd like to give a nod to Sterling Moore and a nod to, we just talked about him a little bit earlier, but Ken Crawley. Thought they both played admirable considering. Obviously not perfect considering we got eaten alive still. Yeah. But it was the run game that really destroyed us, not the passing game. There's only, I think, Matt Ryan only threw for 240 yards. Granted, they were trying to run the ball more, and they were doing it very effectively, but I still think Moore and Crawley should get some credit. I mean, those are players that you don't expect to go up against the Julio Jones, and they did pretty well. Even against the Mohamed Sanu. Maybe Sanu is on that same level that you could compare, but holding Julio Jones to 1 catch on 7 targets, to me, is phenomenal. I mean, I'm so proud of that. Their top 2 receivers, Atlanta's, were both running backs. So they basically shut down the tight end and wide receiver position last night. That's a positive I think you have to note. It was just the run defense falling apart, especially at the second level. Linebackers getting washed out. I remember watching Kruger, Edebali at the line, James Laurinaitis, just getting washed out of plays completely. And when you have a stat that we talked about with Devontae Freeman a little earlier, 120 of his 150 yards coming before contact, I mean, you can't let an Atlanta Falcons line push you around like that. They're just not that good. I realize we're missing starters, but the run defense was the one thing that was semi-solid the first 2 games. So for it to happen like that last night, no excuse. But Nick Fairley, great game. 2 tackles for a loss, a sack and a half. He had 2 quarterback hits. Cam Jordan was his normal, reliable self. He got double-teamed a lot last night, so he got pushed out quite a bit, but he still got 2 hits, half a sack. Overall, those 3 players and the 2 mentions I give, thought they did pretty well. Offense, can we really complain about the offense this year? I mean, they put up 32 points. They put up almost 400 yards passing. They rushed for over 100 yards. You're just not going to win when the defense is in the shape it's in. I mean, I know I got into a nitpick Twitter argument earlier today, going over little things that the offense could do better. But honestly, even if the offense wasn't any better, even if they played perfect, the odds of them winning are pretty low with just how hurt the defense is, the lack of communication because these guys are being thrown in positions, they're being signed off the street to come in and play. So I think we just have to take the positives where we can.
There are a lot of positives for me. And maybe I'm drinking the Drew Brees Kool-Aid to a certain extent when I say I'm optimistic. I am, because as you stated, Brandon Coleman, I've been probably the only person on the Brandon Coleman hype train for maybe the past year and a half or so. When I say, and it's all because I went to OTA's minicamp and I saw Brandon Coleman when Marcus Colston was out. And I saw him excel in that. But in this situation, they were having him play the Marcus Colston role, but being in a slot instead, that big body over the slot. And I saw him excel, and he just looked comfortable. He looked confident in the offense. And once again, last night, he played in the slot. And all of a sudden, Brandon Coleman looks like somebody that you can trust on the field. As you said, 7 of 8 catches. He was targeted 8 times, caught 7 of them. 1 pass, he dropped okay, and it was a pretty tough catch, but he should have came down with it. It wasn't the hardest catch, but he should have came down with that one, and he knew it. But very next play he atoned for it. So very proud of what I saw from Brandon Coleman. And as the offense as a whole, as you stated, what more could you have asked the offense to do besides the pick 6 in this situation from Brees? But other than that, I mean, come on.
That Drew Brees interception only happens when he's playing from such a big deficit and he forces.
Exactly.
Normally that is not a Drew Brees play. So I mean, now it happens when there's just no deep. When he's playing from he's trailing. He's done that his whole career in New Orleans. He's done it for 10 years. So I wasn't surprised. I think I remember multiple people calling it on Twitter last night, saying it was going to happen, just because we understand this team. So that's just it's part of it. We just have to take it how it is. Now let me add this on Brandon Coleman. When you are 7'10" and weigh 250 pounds as a wide receiver,